Chevre, how are you? I hope everyone is gesund, stark, und freilich begashmus und beruchnis. I hope everyone is healthy, strong, and happy physically and spiritually. Today is Tes Shevat, Erev Shabbos Kodesh Pashas Boi. Boi Shabbos is Yud Shvat, the Yom Elul Yortzeit of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Sunday is Yud Aleph Shvat, is the day which our Rebbe accepted the official leadership of Chabad Lubavitch. So these 2 days, Shabbos Yud Shvat and Sunday Yud Aleph Shvat, are very, very important days to the Chabad Lubavitch movement. So as usual, we have to understand the connection between Yud Aleph Shvat, the previous Rebbe, the Rebbe, and Parshas Boi. As usual, before we start, we will first, these weeks, as we said many times, our hearts and minds are our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael. So we'll start with tzedakah, giving extra tzedakah, so that the hostages should come home now, the war should end now, everyone should be happy, and there should be peace in Eretz Yisrael. So here we're giving tzedakah, G'dei l'tzedakah shemakareves sagula, Mashiach now. Now we're going to say a prayer, as we do every single week, and this is a posik, which in the Maimed, the Hasidic discourse that we're learning this year, we focus on an explanation that's connected to this pasuk. It's a pasuk from Tilim and chapter Kuf Lametes, pasuk Ches. Im esak shamayim shamata v'atzir shoel hineka. If I soar to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the abyss, behold, you are there. So we're going to connect this pasuk that we're speaking about also with the content and the theme of what we're discussing this week. Now, in truth, what we're going to discuss this week, in a certain sense, the story of Parshas Boi, what makes this parsha unique, is the actual exodus of Mitzrayim, from Mitzrayim. Next week's parsha, Vayihi b'shalach Paroi, Paroi is chasing us, and then comes the miracle of the splitting of the Red Sea, and in a certain sense, that is even greater. But nevertheless, in a certain sense, what happens this week's parsha is greater, and that's why we celebrate the first day of Pesach, is greater than Shvi Shel Pesach. Most average people will say that. The Yom Tov of Pesach, the Leil Seder, which is something which is so awesome. Laman Tiskers Yom Tzeischa Me'eretz Mitzrayim Kol Yimei Chayecha. We have to always remember the day we went out of Egypt. Yes, that happens in this week's parsha. When all the Jews left Egypt, there's a border, we step over that border, that boundary, and we're free. And we became a free people. That happens in Parshas Boi. So the message in Parshas Boi is something we're meant to live with every single day, as we'll discuss today. And we'll discuss how it's connected to the verse we just mentioned before. But first, we'll start with a question. Now, what I'm going to say today is primarily based on a Hasidic discourse of the Rebbe Rashab, the 5th Lubavitcher Rebbe, connected with the talk of the Rebbe in Tafshin Nun Aleph and in Tafshin Nun Beis. So let's start, and it's connected to the very name of the parsha, and the parsha starts like this: Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. Moshe spoke to Moshe. Hashem spoke to Moshe. Boi el Paroi, come to Paroi. Keni ich badadi esliboi. Because Hashem says, I have hardened his heart, Veslev Avodov, and the hearts of his courtiers, his slaves, so that I may demonstrate these miraculous signs of mine in his midst. That's the first pasuk. And then it says, Olaman tesape ba'ozne vincho ben bincho, eis asher salalti b'mitzrayim, v'soisoisai asher samti vom, v'idaitem kini Hashem. And so that you may recount to your children and grandchildren how I made a mockery of the Egyptians and how I performed my miraculous signs among them. You will then realize that I am Hashem. So the truth is, I love it when you have one verse, one pasuk, and the pasuk, and especially when you learn Chassidus, as we'll explain, we see how in this pasuk, we have only one verse or two verses, and this contains the entire essence of Judaism. The whole story, in these two verses. And the same thing we say sometimes, hafachba, the kulaba. Toil in it and toil in it, because everything is contained within it. Sometimes it's true about, we generally talking about the Torah. The Torah contains everything. Sometimes it's one verse. Because the truth is, every single verse of the Torah contains really the whole essence. We just have to be very great scholars and tzaddikim to be able to see it that way. And this is what we'll see in this week's Parsha. So over here, the Rebbe in many siches, in Tofshin Nun Aleph and in Beis, and the Balaturim talks about it. The famous question, why does it say in the Pasuk, Boi el Parei, come to Parei? The Pasuk should have said, Lech el Parei, go to Parei. That's one question. And in the Maimer, what I'm talking about, the discourse of the Rebbe Rashab, it's a Maimer of Boi el Parei, Tov Reish. I'm just going to tell you the page number. Whoever is learning Ayin Beis, that's a series of Hasidic discourses of the Rebbe Rashab. So this is a Maimer from Shabbos Pashas Boi Tov Reish Ayin Hey, and it's in page 832. It starts, and what I'm discussing is the answers, which is making the 841. Tov Mem Aleph. So over there, the Rebbe Rashab asks the Klotz Kasha, why does the pasuk say Boi el Parei, come to Parei, ki ani ichbadati es libay? Because I made harden his heart. If anything, that's the reason I shouldn't go to Parei. Why is the reason that Hashem says go to Parei, Keni ichbadati es libay? I made him more stubborn. If Hashem is telling Moshe to go to Parei, so Hashem should have said, I softened him up already. He's going to listen this time. What's the logic in telling Moshe, go to Parei, come to Parei, because I hardened his heart? So over here, the Rebbe Rashab says we have an answer to one of the most fundamental general questions. If we had to have a discussion of what are the questions, the most famous questions that people have concerning religion and Hashem, so one of the most great questions is, how could there be Hashem? How could things come from God? Bad things. Why does bad things happen to good people? And what's the whole idea? What's the point? This is now we're discussing more. What's the point of making an anti-God in the world? If the Eibishter stands for truth, and the Eibishter is only true existence, so why are the things in this world that are the opposite of that? They stand for things that are falsehood. As right now we're going through with the story in Eretz Yisrael right now in our current times, we've never seen such displays of protests by hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people that is all peddling lies. Mamish like a blood libel. Now we have blood libels on a mass scale throughout many, many countries. What's going on over here? Why would there be such a thing? So that's a major question. And that's a question that Hashem answers in this week's Parsha, which continues in that pasuk. We'll soon explain. And that's why the pasuk says, Laman Shisi Yisai Eile B'Kirbei, because it's all going to be a demonstration of how even more powerful Hashem is. And then it comes to the point that it's all really to impress upon a Yid that he should realize the power of Hashem. So let's go back. First of all, why does it say come Boi el Parei? Because over here there's a Zohar that says that every single level that Moshe Rabbeinu dealt with before, the different levels of Parei, the different encounters were manifestations of Parei, lower levels of Parei, but not to the essence, to the core, to the headquarters, to the bunker, to the inner sanctum, so to speak, of the level of evil of Parei. And therefore Moshe Rabbeinu was a bit apprehensive. So therefore, this is what the Zohar says, that there are chambers upon chambers, deeper and deeper. Moshe Rabbeinu dealt with more of the external, outer defenses, so to speak, of Parei, till this week's Parsha. Now we're coming to the culmination, to the climax. And this is the key point over here. That the real way to deal with a situation is not to deal with the symptoms, but to get to the root cause. You know, everyone knows this when it comes to medicine. Sometimes you have a person and you have acne, you have dandruff, I don't know what, you could have a cold, you could have sinuses, you could have allergies, you could have arthritis, you could have diabetes, chas v'sholom, yeah? So you go to the doctor and you tell the doctor all the different symptoms. Now sometimes it could be that all these different things are not related. It just so happens to be that you have this thing wrong and that thing wrong, and you also happen to break your shoulder or bang your foot and break your foot, whatever the story is. Your breaking of the foot has nothing to do with your diabetes. It so happened to be that that's one situation. But then there's another situation, a more holistic approach, so to speak, where it could be that instead of dealing with the symptoms, we have to get to the root cause. And once we get to the root cause, as they say, once we get to the bottom of it, and then we deal with it, we get rid of the problem at the source, then all of a sudden, automatically, all the symptoms disappear. And this is the story over here. The Eibishter was telling Parai, based on what the Zohar explains, now we're finally going to get to the root cause. This week's parasha, as we've got, the makas are getting escalated, and we're getting heightened to a higher level, and there's going to be Yetzias Mitzrayim. Once and for all, we're going to crush the empire of this arrogance completely. And as it's explained in other places, the klipa, the evil that was Parai, there's different ways how we deal with evil. Sometimes it has to be transformed, channeled in the right direction, and then there's some issues in evil which have to be eradicated and destroyed, nullified completely. Just like in a person, you have aspects of your personality that have a good side to it, and that has to be channeled and transformed in a good direction. But then there's some aspects that are 99.9% of the cases, something which is usually negative, that has to be eradicated. For example, anger. We say anger is not a good thing. And even in those places where, in the 1%, 2%, where the Torah discusses an anger, for example, a teacher in front of the students or a parent to a child, the Shulchan Aruch makes it clear that it's not really an anger which is out of control. It's more of an anger in the face of the students, so they should see that, to teach them the lesson of importance. But it still means that the parent or the teacher is in total control. It's not that the anger took control of them. On the contrary, they're in control of the anger. And it's more zum Ponimswegen, so to speak, to impress upon the child. But the person who's expressing that sort of emotion is still in total control. So basically, kas kol hakoyes, kilo oved avodah zarah, one who exercises and loses himself because of anger, it's like he served idolatry. So we see there are certain things, or let's say, for example, in general, those along Chassidus, we say we have klipas nega, that's an apple, a kosher apple. You're meant to make a blessing. You're meant to think you should use this energy to serve God. That's an example of elevating. And then we have certain things that are not kosher, they're treif. We're not allowed to eat it. We're supposed to just discard it, have nothing to do with it. So in the same way, in general, concerning the world, there's most of the world, and in general, we have to elevate the world, refine the world. That comes through engagement. But then there's certain things where we say disengagement, have nothing to do with it, and that's how we make the world a better place, by discarding it. Now's not the time to get into the whole story. In the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, in contrast to, by the way, when Mashiach will come, it's explained that in Yetzias Mitzrayim, there had to be a situation where we had to get to the bottom of this evil, because it was pure evil and pure arrogance, a total denial of God. We have to get to the, like we said other times, the bunker busting bomb. We have to get to the bottom. We have to get to the root. And therefore, by the way, according to many commentaries, in the whole story of the Exodus of Egypt, why there had to be 10 plagues, there's many different commentaries that discuss the 10 and the order of the 10. And the bottom line for many of the commentators is that the 10 plagues represent how we take apart, dismantle, destroy, decimate, crush an enemy thoroughly. And that's what had to happen over here. It had to be on 10 levels until we got to the bottom of it. And then we have true liberation and freedom in the world, as we'll discuss today more in our inner service of Hashem. So now, let's go back to the Pasuk. First of all, Hashem is telling Moshe Rabbeinu, Boy el Paroi. We're now going to go to the central headquarters of evil, into the monster's lair, into the belly of the beast, into the heart of darkness, where it's most powerful. So therefore Moshe Rabbeinu was a bit apprehensive. So therefore Hashem tells him, boy, you're going to dig deeper into yourself. You're going to reveal your essence, which is connected to my essence, and I'm there together with you, and therefore you'll be able to conquer Paray. You'll be able to conquer Paray at the root, similar to what we spoke last week. Re'ei nesaticha, Elikim, over Paray. This is a continuation of that. But wait, there's more. What about the question of why does the logic follow? Ki ani ichbadati es libai. Because I made his heart heartened, therefore you should go. So this is an answer the Rebbe Rashab explains to why we could conquer them. The emphasis on the word ki ani ichbadati es libai. There's no second power here. Evil doesn't mean that something else, the devil chas v'sholem, or something else, another reshus took over. No, the same Hashem which has chesed also has gvura. The same Hashem that has gvura has chesed. Like we spoke many times, the concept of v'yadaita ki havayahu elikim. The God which is revealed is the same God which conceals, but it's not another God chas v'sholem. There's only one Eibishter, ein eit milvadoi. So therefore, Boyel Paray, now you can go to the headquarters of Paray, because you have to realize, there's nothing else in control. It's like saying there's the good news and the bad news, and we'll say it again, there's many times you can say the good news and the bad news. And it comes out to be the same thing. The bad news is, Chas v'Sholem, that everything that's happening in the world is the Eibishter. Don't think there's somebody else. We have to turn to Hashem. But really, Chas v'Sholem, I shouldn't even say the bad news, I would say it's a true word. Because really, the good news is it's all Hashem. So therefore, there is a reason, there is a plan. It's hard for us to accept it, and we have to turn to the Eibishter and say enough with the lessons. But we do have to realize, and that's what we're asking for, by the way, as we'll say soon, another story with the Rebbe, a famous story. But we do have to realize that in the end, it's all Eibishter. And because it's all Eibishter, there is no power on this planet Earth that could get in the way of what the Eibishter's will is. The only thing is, sometimes the Eibishter does things that makes it very, very difficult for us to accept, and we have to cry out that we're holding by breaking point, but we have to always remember and not for a second lose the focus and understand that it's all Hashem. And therefore we could change it in a second. There's nothing really to be fearful from. As the saying goes, the only thing to fear is fear itself. Why is there nothing really to fear? It's all Hashem. And if you wanted it to change, you could change it in a second. And that's what the Pasuk says over here, according to the Rebbe Rashab. I'm just going to read you some of the Lashonis over here. That he says on the words, Ki ani ichbadati, Tegam zeh me'es Hashemu. This is also from Hashem. That there's a kavon al-yayna, and we should come to a greater glory. That's what he says, that we should see the Isaisayim Moifsim, that we should see more miracles. That's what the Rebbe Rashab answers. Now, let's talk about another point over here, the next pasuk, and the pasuk says, V'yadaitem kinei Hashem, and the main thing is, L'man tesaper b'oznei bincha ben binches v'shalalti b'mitzrayim. So this really, what the pasuk is saying over here, in a way, is the same thing that the first pasuk the Eibishter says by the Aseret Dibris. Yeah? What's Judaism? Anoichi Hashem Elikecha asher sitzicha me'eretz Mitzrayim. Yeah? So you can ask a question, why is it so important? Why couldn't the Eibishter just say, like the first halacha in the Rambam, Yisoydes v'amuda chochmas leida shi Hashem motzidishin. Let it just say like that. Why isn't it gay to say Anoichi Hashem Elikecha asher sitzicha me'eretz Mitzrayim? It is connected to the question that we mentioned many times already in previous Shurim. Why does the Aseret Dibris start on Anoichi Hashem Elikecha, Asher Sitzicha Me'eretz Mitzrayim, and not Anoichi Hashem Elikecha, Asher Barasi Shemayim V'Aretz? And the point is, because what's Yiddishkeit? The whole idea of Yiddishkeit is that we are going to have a nation, as the Maral writes in many places, that we are Nivdal. There's the whole world, there's the laws of nature, there's things that are part of creation, and then there's that which transcends creation. transcends the laws of nature, transcends the laws of survival. And that's the story of the Exodus. And that's the story of the Makkos. The Makkos were about revelations of Hashem's infinity. And that's the point, that even if a person is in a situation where it seems that there's totally insurmountable odds, and something that might have to defy the laws of physics, and something which doesn't make sense, and you see there's no way out, and according to the laws of nature, there's no way out. You have to. How is a person going to make panos if he can't work on Shabbos? How is a person going to be healthy when Hashem says you should cut yourself when you're 8 days old? How are you going to have a better marriage if you keep the laws of purity, which means you have to separate? All these sort of things that if you went to a marriage counselor, they'll say it might not make sense. And the answer is, a Jew is different. Anochi Hashem Elikecha. That what? What's Yiddishkeit? Mitzrayim, as we said many times, doesn't only mean a place on the map, Egypt, but limitations. The whole idea of Yiddishkeit is, there's one set of rules which goes according to the laws of nature, but Yiddishkeit is the opposite point. That it makes no difference what the laws of nature is. You should always know you have the power of transcendence. We could transcend. We could be slaves for 200 years in a place, and not one slave ever escaped that place. And if it wouldn't have happened according to certain laws of nature, we might even still be slaves. But guess what? Hashem has no limitations. You can break out. You could be living in a world which is a cutthroat competition business world, and you could close shop for Yom Tov and for Shabbos, and you can make more money than your competition. Why? Because that's what a Jew is. And that's what the pasuk says over here straight away after the pasuk says, which means that we see the whole purpose of it all is to come to a greater demonstration of Hashem's infinity, and that ein oid mulvadoi. So we see a revelation of how whatever level of opposition, whatever level of question, whatever challenging situation there is, the greater the challenge is. The greater the miracle that becomes revealed of God's powers, that He is in control. The whole point of the anti is to come to a greater affirmation and a greater demonstration of the conviction of the truth of Hashem. As we said many times, this is revealed generally in two ways. That which is with me will be, and that which is against me cannot be. So, in a certain sense, what the Eibishter does, he creates a facade of something that seems to be against, and might even be very powerfully against. But in the end, what comes out is that what becomes revealed, that nothing. It becomes ashes. It becomes nothing. And therefore, the pasuk continues that in the end, it's about that a Jew should see this point and live with this point. And therefore, Tesaper Be'ozne Vincha Ben Mincha Isa Shesalamti B'Mitzrayim V'Seisoisa Shesamti Bom V'Yedaitem Kini Havaya. This is going to be Negeya for the rest of the Jewish history for thousands and thousands of years. Laman Tiske Hashem Tzeis Chameres Mitzrayim Kol Yimei Chayecha. Whatever difficulties, whatever hardships, whatever the situation is, you should know that Anochi Havaya Likecha. Havaya Likecha Anochi. There's the essence that's higher than Havaya and Likecha. And therefore, there's no limitations. You could be, as the pasuk we started today, you could be in a situation of Sha'el, but even there you have to realize, Hineka. Okay, so I want to connect this now quickly to the previous Rebbe and the Rebbe. And even though what I'm going to say now about the previous Rebbe is something which we could talk about for a half hour itself, and it's a point that I realized just a couple of years ago, and I don't want to elaborate, but this is the point. And that is, the previous Rebbe accomplished this thing in a way that no other Jew brought and revealed this truth of Eined Milvadai like the previous Rebbe. To put it in one sentence, the greatest three forces in the world, political systems, in the last 100 years was fascism, Rahman al-Islam, communism, Rahman al-Islam, and democracy. Which tzaddik was the one who went into the belly of the beast and in each of these cases did what was meant to be done and to reveal Hashem's unity, the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Frierdiker Rebbe was arrested in 1927, and he was in a prison where they would kill a Jew with the same sensitivity like they would swat a fly. And the previous Rebbe writes about how he was there in that prison and he heard the moaning and the groanings and the shrieks and the terror, what was inflicted over there on fellow prisoners. People were taken out to the courtyard and shot. People were being tortured. The Frierdiker himself was physically assaulted there. And in a miracle of all miracles, one man against a superpower, as the Rebbe would say, so to speak, stood up against the regime, spoke truth to power, and lived to tell the tale. Wow! Unbelievableness. And I'm going to read to you what the Rebbe writes in Likutei Sichos, Chelik Chav Gimel, page 165. The Rebbe says a very important thing, and he says over there that what happened over there, that over there it's Uvigetan, that etzem shtel from Rebbe, the previous Rebbe's approach and attitude, mit atoykev otzem in seiner Noge dort, that even when he was there as a prisoner, in the darkest of the darkest dungeons, so to speak. And the Frierdiker Rebbe himself wrote about his life, and he called it Shiva Medura Gehenim, which means hell. So even in such a place like Gehenim, his whole approach was as he was not affected by them whatsoever. He didn't show any sense of intimidation. He didn't record them as an existence. He looked at them as if they're nothingness, less than a speck of dirt, less than a speck of dust. That's how he conducted himself the whole time that he was a prisoner there. And this is what I want to tell you, these words that Rebbe writes. In Meiser Gufe as Einid Movadei. That revealed that in the state of imprisonment itself, Einid Movadei. That happened in 1927. In 1929, the previous Rebbe in December went to America. And he went to the Independence Hall in Philadelphia. This I only found out a couple of years ago, but it's documented fact. When I found out about it, I was in a high for a couple of days. He went to the Independence Hall. You know what the Independence Hall in Philadelphia is? It's called the birthplace of the United States of America. That's what it's called. The birthplace of the United States of America, which means he went into the belly of the beast in a good way, where the United States of America was born, which is a sense of independence, which could be something that not necessarily is connected to Hashem, but he went there into the heart of democracy in the Independence Hall, and it says that he sat in George Washington's chair and he gave a speech very similar to the speech that we all know about, the Sikha the Rebbe spoke in Vayeshev Nun Beis, which in 1994, Parsha Vayeshev, the Rebbe spoke a talk, how democracy is not a contradiction to religion. Guess what? The previous Rebbe already spoke that content in the December of 1929. So that means, again, he went to the heart of democracy, into the central headquarters of democracy, in the birthplace of the United States of America, and he channeled it. This is where you channel the world in a way of klipas noiga, entanglement, engagement, in a good way. He takes the idea of democracy, he speaks about it, and he says how it could be channeled for Hashem. That was in 1929. And then there was 1940, where he was in German-occupied Warsaw. The Frierdiker Rebbe, as far as we know, is the only documented story where was a Jew who was rescued by the Nazis in Yimach Shemam. He was escorted by Nazi unit soldiers out of German-occupied Warsaw, and he was and he was escorted out. They took him to I think Munich, or Berlin, and then from there to Riga, and then ultimately his life was saved. Baruch Hashem. The point is, and I think there's a book, a secular book that was written, I think it's called Rescue from the Reich, And I remember reading in that book where this author, who's not a religious person at all, it's a secular book printed by some university press, where he says there is no other documented story of a Jew who was escorted by Nazis outside of Germany, outside of a Nazi-controlled country. Now, whatever the story is, but that definitely, if you have any belief in the power of tzaddikim and how the Eibishter runs the world, so obviously at that time, Germany wasn't in war with the United States, and there's an explanation to it. But the point is, the story itself, that the previous Rebbe was in Warsaw after it was already German occupied, and he was able to get out of there, shows that it was a certain Kabbalistic concept. Like everything that happens with a tzaddik, it's a bir, it's an elevating of the world, it's an elevating of something. There was some level how the previous Rebbe had to go through this experience, and anything that happens to a tzaddik who's a leader of the world, everything that happens to a tzaddik has monumental importance. So this also shows, again, something like that happened to him that didn't happen to any other Jew, and it definitely reflects on a certain level of how he was able to alleviate some aspect of it to a certain extent. Finally, that's all Yud Shevat. And now let's go to the Rebbe, Yud Aleph Shevat. It's very long already, it's late, so I'll just say 2 points with the Rebbe. Number one, everyone knows the story where the Rebbe wrote something to one of the presidents of Israel that he's not calling him Nasi, and he wrote the famous words in a letter to one of the presidents of Israel, and he wrote, from the day I went to Cheder, and even before that, I already was bothered I was waiting for the answer to the Jewish suffering, persecution, oppression, and throughout all the years. And I'm waiting for the day where Mashiach will arrive and we'll be able to say, Oid Hashem ki anaftabi. So it's similar to what we're learning over here in this week's pasuk. We have to remember, Kanich Badati, it's all Hashem. But that's not good enough. Because like we said a couple of weeks ago, right now, thank you very much, we're going through an exile. We do see miracles. We want to see more miracles. But it's not the ultimate. We want the ultimate. Just like we understand in Klippa that we have to get to the rock bottom. And we have to get to the source. And enough with the symptoms. It's the same thing in the opposite way. A miracle lahina, a miracle laher, Amen Hashem, please show us many, many miracles in a revealed way. But in the end, we want the miracle, the ultimate miracle. There's a story with the Friedrich Rebbe that was Chassid who said there should be many Yeshuas. The Friedrich Rebbe said, we just need one Yeshua, aber Arichtige. We need one Yeshua, one salvation, one help. But the right one, the jackpot, is going to take care of everything. Once we have Mashiach, it'll be the end of all suffering. So the Rebbe was saying he's waiting for the day we'll be able to say, Oid Hashem ki anaftabi. We'll finally get the real answer. When Mashiach comes, the ultimate aha moment, then we'll be able to really appreciate all the suffering and the hardships that have befallen the nation throughout the whole years. It's not enough that we survived. It's not enough even that we thrived. Because Hashem was with us, we need to see that we still feel the pain. We still feel that the price was too steep. Right now there are hostages. Hashem Yirachem, please. Right now there are soldiers that are still Rahman al-Islam have to pay the ultimate price. Enough is enough. We want the ultimate. Let's get to the core. Let's get to the root of the salvation, the revelation of Atzmos U'Ma'os, Gula Mitzvah Shlema. And therefore, getting back to the Rebbe, who was so mind-boggling that as a child, this is a story that's straight up Moshe Rabbeinu level. Where do we find the story of a Jewish child who's bothered by the age of 3 and 4 about what? Not about ice cream, not about chocolate, not about toys. His problem in life is Jewish suffering throughout the ages. Unbelievable. And then the Rebbe in his first Farbringen, early Yud Aleph Shvat, 1951, he said, and now is not the time to elaborate all these concepts of something we could talk about for a whole day. He was the only one that came along and said, we have to finish the job. Just like it says by Moshe Rabbeinu that he made it happen. There was an Avram, there was a Yitzchak, there was a Yaakov, there was a Yosef, there was 7 tzaddikim. Moshe Rabbeinu was the 7th, and his job was to make it happen. And to make it happen means Matan Torah, the revelation at Sinai, and then even furthermore, greater, the Mishkan, Ve'osli migdash v'zechanti b'seicham, Hashem residing with the Jewish nation. The same thing is today. The Rebbe said that the first Farbrengen where he took on the leadership in 1951, you could say that he took upon himself the greatest challenge and the greatest goal, that we should have Mashiach. He said this is the last generation of exile and the first generation of redemption. So that means that what he told his followers, what he told us, and he galvanized us, and he charged us with a mission, that even if you write to me tomorrow that in Madison Square Garden there was 100,000 people, Jews that put on tefillin and said Shema Yisrael, and the day before they never put on tefillin, the Rebbe would go like this, very nice, but it's not Mashiach. And until we don't have Lahamshech es Hashchina Dol Lemata Ba'aretz, until we make it happen, the Gula Mitzvah Shlema, redemption, that means it didn't happen. It's great. We're not going to knock good deeds. But as long as we didn't get to the it moment, we didn't get to the root, the Ein Richtige Yeshua, we still have to work and work and work. And this is what we have to look at ourselves. This Shabbos, the schus of the Bal Yom Elul, the Friedrich Rebbe should bring Yeshuas to us all in every single area of our lives. And Yud Aleph Shevat, the day which the Rebbe officially accepted in his ears, it should both reinvigorate us on the mission to live our lives, Kol Yemei Chayecha, L'Hovi L'Meis Mashiach, focused on this mission to make it happen. It's very nice. We're all doing great things and we're accomplishing great things, but we need to make Mashiach happen. Geula Amitzah V'Ashleimat, like in this week's parsha, Ki Meitzeis Chamet Messiah, Arenor Flois, Begula Mitzvah Shlema, take it from Yad, Mamish. Posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisborech, your man in Melbourne.